Unsolved mysteries, the most haunting crime cases in America. The rain fell in sharp, steady lines against the narrow windows of the Federal Records Building, turning the glass into a blur of gray streaks. Inside, the archive room was unnervingly quiet, a long corridor of metal shelves stacked with boxes labeled with years, states, and case numbers. It smelled of dust, old paper, and secrets that had never stopped breathing. The investigator pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. She was there to review a set of cold case files requested for a new audit, but she didn't expect to find 3 of America's most haunting mysteries sitting in the same unmarked box. The cases weren't related. They weren't from the same decade. They didn't even come from the same states. Yet someone had placed them together. On the top of the stack lay the oldest one, the 1962 escape from Alcatraz. The folder was thick, stuffed with reports, photos, and handwritten notes from officers who had spent decades trying to determine what really happened that night. The investigator lifted the first page and felt a chill run up her arm. It described the stormy June evening when 3 inmates, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, slipped from their cells inside the infamous island prison. Their escape had been meticulous: crafted tools, hidden preparation, a makeshift raft. But the part that haunted investigators for generations wasn't the escape itself. It was the void that followed. Not a single confirmed sighting. Not a single recovered body. Not a single piece of conclusive evidence. The investigator stared at one sentence highlighted in faded blue ink. Search area exhausted. Possibility remains undetermined. That single line had kept the case open in the minds of investigators for 60 years. No closure. No certainty. Only an endless ocean and a raft that may or may not have reached shore. She placed the Alcatraz file down carefully and pulled out the second folder, Maura Murray, 2004. The atmosphere in the room seemed to shift with the weight of the case. The first report detailed the night Maura's car was found on a quiet rural road in New Hampshire. No sign of struggle. No footprints leading away. No confirmed sightings. Neighbors who saw her car couldn't agree on what they saw. Some details contradicted each other. Others led nowhere. Investigators followed hundreds of leads, interviews, searches, phone records, all circling the same unanswered question. How does a person vanish in the span of minutes on a rural road with no clear explanation? The investigator reading the file had worked cold cases long enough to know that some disappearances carried a strange stillness, a kind of unresolved tension that made the unanswered questions feel heavier than the evidence itself. Maura's case was one of them. Every detail was real. Every lead was documented. But none of it pointed to a definitive truth. She placed the folder aside, her fingers brushing the third case, the Springfield Three, 1992. This one was different. Heavier. Not because of its age, but because of the silence surrounding it. 2 teenagers, Stacy and Susie's mother, Cheryl, vanished from their home overnight. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. No alarm from neighbors. Personal items left behind. A porch light bulb shattered. A dog inside unharmed. And then, nothing. For more than 30 years. The investigator opened the file to the first interview transcript. A neighbor had described the disappearance as a clean cut from reality, like the house swallowed them whole. It wasn't sensationalism. It was a genuine description of a case where investigators found no starting point. No timeline. No final confirmed sighting. Just 3 people who vanished into a void that has never been explained. The investigator closed the folder slowly. All 3 cases were different. One an escape, one a disappearance, one a trio of missing persons, but they shared a pattern that made her stomach tighten. All 3 had gaps. Silences. Moments where timelines dissolved and facts blurred. As she stacked the files, something slipped from between the pages of the Springfield Three report, a handwritten note in faded black ink. She picked it up. It wasn't official. It wasn't signed. It simply read, "These cases don't share facts. They share the same missing moment." Her pulse quickened. She checked each file. No record of the note. No signature. No date. Someone had placed it there deliberately, Someone who saw connections where others saw separate mysteries. Intrigued, she turned the note over, hoping for context. There was none. Only one more line, written in a hurried scrawl. Find the gap. The truth lives inside it. She sat back in her chair, staring at the note, suddenly aware of the storm intensifying outside. The rain beat echoed against the windows like distant footsteps, filling the room with a rising tension. 3 of America's most haunting cases. 3 disappearances into silence. 3 gaps in time that no one had ever been able to explain. Now it seemed someone who had handled these files before, believed the answers weren't in what investigators knew, but in what they never saw. And then she noticed something else, something that froze her breath. The handwriting on the note. It didn't match any investigator who had ever been assigned to these cases. Someone else had touched these files. Someone who shouldn't have been anywhere near them. The investigator held the mysterious note between her fingers, the ink faded and uneven, as though written in haste or written a very long time ago. Whoever left it had placed it deliberately between the pages of the Springfield Three case file, almost like a breadcrumb meant for someone patient enough to sift through decades of dust and unanswered questions. She scanned the archive card again. No signature, no initials, no identifying marks. The more she studied it, the more one detail unsettled her. The stroke pattern wasn't consistent with any of the known case contributors. Not detectives. Not clerks. Not archivists. Not analysts. It was as if the writer didn't want to be recognized. She placed the note on the table and opened all 3 files side by side. Alcatraz, 1962. Springfield, 1992. Maura Murray, 2004. Different eras. Different circumstances. Different jurisdictions. Yet each of them contained a moment where the trail simply collapsed. She started with Alcatraz. In the escape file, the timeline went from meticulous hourly head counts, patrol movements, weather conditions, to absolute nothing once the inmates left the shoreline. The final entry ended abruptly, search suspended due to conditions. It wasn't a clue, but it was a void. Next she moved to the Springfield Three. The timeline there was even more unsettling. The teenagers were last seen returning home. The mother was last heard from by friends. Telephone records showed a few incoming calls. Then the entire timeline collapsed in the span of a single night. No forced entry, no sign of a struggle, no phone records pointing outward. Their last verifiable action simply stopped. Another void. Maura Murray's case had the sharpest gap of all. Camera footage showed her withdrawing money, sending emails, driving north. Her car was found on a remote road, engine warm. A witness saw a figure. Police arrived minutes later. And then, silence. A timeline fracture so sharp it felt like a tear. The same missing moment the anonymous note hinted at. The investigators circled the 3 voids with a red marker. 3 different cases. 3 different states. 3 different decades. But the pattern was unmistakable. A moment where the known world drops out from under the case. She returned to the note. Find the gap. The truth lives inside it. Was someone suggesting these voids contain the answers investigators had missed? She began digging through the archive logs, the sign-in sheets of those who had accessed the files. Alcatraz had been viewed hundreds of times, but only a handful of people accessed the original 1962 documents in the past decade. Springfield had fewer visitors. Maura Murray's archive had been checked sporadically. But there was one surprising detail. A single initials mark, faded, faint, appeared on all 3 access logs. Same initials. Same handwriting style. But no matching employee name ever existed in the archive database. She pulled the access records again, slower this time, running her fingers along the faded strokes. The handwriting wasn't hurried the way the note was. Instead, it was careful, almost overly precise. Whoever wrote it had signed indiscreetly, just enough to check the file out, but not enough for the system to identify them. She traced the initials again. Not a staffer. Not a clerk. Not a detective tied to any of the cases. Someone else had studied these exact timelines. Someone who understood the gaps. She reached for a fourth folder that had been tucked under the others, one she hadn't opened yet. It wasn't part of the mystery cases. It was an administrative review file, dated 2007. A routine evaluation of cold case handling procedures. It shouldn't have any relation to the unsolved mysteries. But something about the way it was placed beneath the others felt intentional. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Not typed. Not stamped. Handwritten. Her breath caught. The handwriting was the same maroon ink she had seen before, the exact lettering that appeared in the note inside the Springfield file. The top of the page read, "Patterns in disappearance timelines, preliminary notes." Below that were bullet points. Each case contains a moment where information collapses abruptly. Each case has conflicting final observations. Each case has a window of time where no reliable witness can confirm the subject's actions. No shared locations, suspects, or motives, only the structural gap. The investigator felt her pulse quicken as she reached the final line, underlined twice. The answer is not in what happened. The answer is in what should have left a trace, but didn't. She stared at the words, feeling the weight of them. Whoever it was, they weren't theorizing out of curiosity. They were documenting, mapping, piecing together decades of cases to understand why certain disappearances carved out silence instead of evidence. She flipped the sheet over. One more line had been written on the back, faint, almost hesitant. "I don't know what links them, but if someone else finds this, keep looking where I stopped." She exhaled slowly. Someone before her had tried to solve these mysteries. Someone who worked in silence, leaving clues scattered across decades of case files. The investigator slid the maroon page across the desk until it lay between the three folders. Something tied them together. Not a suspect. Not a motive. Not a method. A void. And whoever it was had gotten close enough to see the shape of that void. The storm outside broke into a rumbling thunder as the investigator leaned forward and whispered to no one. Why were these cases placed together? Before she could finish the thought, she noticed something on the Alcatraz file she hadn't seen before, a faint indentation on the inside cover. Letters pressed into the paper from something that once rested on top. 3 letters. Her stomach dropped. Someone from the past hadn't just studied these cases. They had touched this box. They had handled these files. And they had left something behind she hadn't found yet. The indentation on the Alcatraz file cover felt like a whisper from another era. 3 letters. Pressed faintly into the cardboard. The same initials found in the access logs. The same maroon handwriting hidden in the Springfield file. The same unseen observer who'd left analytical breadcrumbs scattered across 3 of America's most haunting cases. The investigator stepped back from the table. The file seemed to stare back at her, silent, unresolved, waiting. Before she could process the discovery, a crack of thunder rattled the archive windows. The storm had reached its peak, and every gust of wind made the building creak like it was shifting under the weight of decades of secrets. She pulled the Alcatraz file closer and searched for more markings. Nothing on the cover. Nothing on the first pages. But halfway through, tucked between 2 faded incident reports, she found another note, nearly translucent from age. It was just one line. All 3 disappearances share a missing witness. She froze. That phrase didn't mean a witness who vanished. It meant a witness who should have existed but didn't. A person who should have seen something, yet never appeared in any testimony. She opened the other files rapidly. In the Alcatraz Escape, someone in a nearby cell should have reported movement, but no reliable account was ever recorded that in the Springfield Three, neighbors reported hearing nothing, seeing nothing, even though activity inside the house should have been noticeable that in Maura Murray's disappearance. Multiple homes along the road had clear lines of sight, yet not one confirmed, detailed observation. No witnesses. Not even contradictory ones. Just silence. The investigator circled "missing witness" on the note and placed it beside the others. The storm's wind howled against the building, making the lights flicker. She steadied her breath and pulled the administrative log, tracing every time the initials appeared. It wasn't many. But each appearance coincided with a moment where case documents were moved, reorganized, or reviewed. Then something clicked. Wasn't hiding. They were protecting the files, preserving fragments across decades so someone else would eventually see the pattern. She searched the employee archives next, old rosters, volunteer lists, temporary staff logs, even consultants brought in during transitions. It took nearly 30 minutes before she found a match. Evelyn Marston, record keeper. Federal Corrections Review, 1972 to 1991. Transferred to Interagency Filing Unit, 1992 to 2006. Retired, 2007. Her position: document archivist, case analyst, cold case file examiner. Access to every major investigation in the National Archive. The investigators sat still for a moment, letting the realization settle. Evelyn wasn't law enforcement. She wasn't a detective. She wasn't assigned to solve cases. She was responsible for organizing the records, the quiet work no one noticed. But she spent decades reading, comparing, and following trails across different states. She'd seen enough missing person and disappearance files to recognize something strange, something others overlooked. And she'd left breadcrumbs, notes, annotations, reminders, not to solve the mysteries herself, but to make sure someone else would see what she had seen. The investigator found one last reference to Evelyn, a short retirement message stored in a staff bulletin. It was a single sentence. "Thank you for your attention to detail across 35 years of service." Attention to detail. That was an understatement. The archive room felt different now, not threatening, but alive with the weight of decades of unanswered questions finally aligning. She returned to the 3 cases on the table: Alcatraz, Springfield, Maura Murray, and Evelyn's final clue: find the gap. If the witness never appeared, then the gap wasn't in what happened, it was in what didn't happen. She examined each timeline from the moment the victim or escapee was last seen. Alcatraz. Guards didn't check early enough to confirm a final witness. Springfield Three. A neighbor who always walked their dog that night stayed inside due to a sudden storm. Maura Murray. The nearest resident who should have had the clearest view was reportedly out of the house during the critical minutes. 3 different cases. 3 different states. 3 different decades. But each timeline hinged on the exact same eerie detail. The person most likely to have seen something wasn't there, for reasons that had nothing to do with the victims. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.